I spent 40 years in the Corps, from the blistering heat of Fallujah where the sand got in your teeth and the nights were lit by tracer fire, to the quiet valleys back home where the only thing that bit was the wind. When I finally retired, all I wanted was the sound of my own breathing, the kind of silence that wraps around a man like a well-worn blanket. My ranch, 200 acres of golden pasture and whispering pine, gave me that. Mornings began with black coffee on the porch, the steam curling up into the crisp air, the windmill's slow creak like an old friend clearing his throat, and the soft rhythm of horses shifting in their stalls. I named the place Semper Fi Ranch the day I drove the first fence post, my hands blistered but my heart full. It was my sanctuary, my reward for decades of orders and ordnance, a place where the ghosts of war finally stayed quiet. Then Evelyn Harper decided my barn was a war crime, and the silence shattered like glass under a boot. She arrived in a gleaming white Escalade, heels clicking like rifle fire on my gravel drive, each step a small explosion in the morning calm. Clipboard under one arm, oversized sunglasses reflecting my own weathered face, she looked like a general who had never heard a shot fired in anger. She didn't knock, she announced. "Colonel Robert Caldwell," she declared, voice slicing through the air. "This property violates Silver Meadows' aesthetic standards. You have 72 hours to vacate." I set my mug down slow, the ceramic thudding against the rail like a judge's gavel, my pulse steady but my gut tightening with the old familiar coil of combat readiness. "Ma'am, I bought this dirt with blood money and VA paper before your subdivision had a welcome sign. You're standing on sovereign soil." She smiled, thin and sharp, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes, a predator's grin that made my skin crawl. "Boundaries evolve, Colonel. So must you. Modernize or move." I leaned forward, voice low, the words tasting like gunpowder. "You're on my land, Evelyn. Step off it before I have you cited for trespass." Her laugh was a bark, brittle and forced, echoing off the barn like a ricochet. "Cite me? I am the citation." She spun on her heel, leaving a cloud of perfume and a storm cloud behind, and I felt the first hot flare of anger, the kind that had kept me alive in tighter spots than this. That was the opening shot in a war I never enlisted for, and it hit harder than I expected. I'd built the place board by board after my last tour in '09, each nail driven with the precision of a man trying to hammer the war out of his soul. The barn went up in spring of '10, red paint still wet when I hung the Semper Fi sign, my chest swelling with a pride I hadn't felt since pinning on my eagles. The corral followed in 11, the windmill in 12, each structure a monument to survival. Neighbors were half a mile off, retired school teachers like the Millers, who brought over peach cobbler when my wife passed, weekend cowboys like Sam Ruiz, who shared a beer and a story without ever asking for mine. Then the developers rolled in like an invading army, turning open range into cookie-cutter cul-de-sacs, and I felt the first pang of loss, like watching a battlefield paved over. The letters started polite, but each one landed like a slap. Barn color non-compliant. Corral poses visual disharmony. Flag proportions incorrect. I filed every sheet in a manila folder labeled comedy, but the laughter felt hollow, a thin shield against the growing knot in my stomach. When Evelyn showed up in person, I was chewing ginger in the corral, the smell of hot iron and horse sweat grounding me. She marched straight through the gate like she owned the air, and my heart rate kicked up a notch. "Colonel Caldwell, we've had complaints." I didn't look up from the hoof, but my grip tightened on the rasp. "About what?" "The horses breathing too loud. Your entire aesthetic is a blight. Repaint the barn eggshell white, lower the fence to regulation height, remove military signage, or face daily fines escalating to lean." I dropped the rasp, wiped sweat with the back of my wrist, the salt stinging my eyes. "You're standing on sovereign soil, lady. My deed's older than your Botox." She stepped closer, voice dropping to a hiss that sent a chill down my spine. "I can make your life hell, old man. I've buried bigger fish than you in paperwork." I straightened, 6'2" of retired Marine, staring down 5'4" of suburban tyrant, my voice steady, but my blood roaring. "I've had worse from better. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff and have you removed for trespass." She held my gaze for a beat, then spun and click-clacked back to her SUV. "This isn't over," she called over her shoulder, and I felt the weight of her threat settle in my chest like a sandbag. The county clerk, a Navy vet named Alvarez, laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee when I showed him the latest notice, but his eyes were serious. "She's bluffing, Colonel. Your parcel's outside her sandbox by a good quarter mile. Federal grant land trumps HOA charter every day." I made copies of every survey, plat, and grant, my hands moving with the muscle memory of pre-mission prep, but my mind racing with the old fear of losing ground. The orange envelope came nailed to my gate at dawn, notice to vacate. 72 hours. I read it on the porch, coffee going cold, the words blurring as a wave of fury crashed over me, hot and blinding. Evelyn had crossed from nuisance to enemy combatant, and I felt the old warrior stir, hungry for the fight. That night, I called 3 numbers, each one a lifeline. First, Deputy Frank Morales. "She's escalating, Frank. I need a paper trail." "Copy that, Colonel. I'll swing by tomorrow." "And Bob, off the record, half the county's rooting for you." His voice was a balm, steadying the tremor in my hands. Second, the county recorder. "Send me anything that smells like fraud. I want it airtight." My voice cracked on the last word, betraying the fear I refused to name. Third, Captain Jake Bulldog Ramirez at Pendleton. Need a favor, bulldog. Community relations drill. Rural NAV. Keep it clean, keep it loud. A low whistle. How many bodies you thinking? I looked across the valley at the perfect grid of rooftops, each one a mirror of the next, and felt a cold satisfaction bloom. Enough to make her choke on her clipboard. Dawn broke like a starting gun. Diesel engines growled up the ranch road. Boots hit gravel in perfect cadence. 300 Marines on weekend reserve rolled in with Humvees, flatbeds, and the disciplined hum of men who'd seen real fire. They set up on the public right-of-way, exactly where the map said they could. Bio 800 the subdivision looked like a forward operating base, and my heart swelled with the old pride, the kind that comes from watching a plan lock into place. Evelyn burst from her McMansion in the same pink blazer, curlers still in her hair, her face a mask of rage and panic. "This is an invasion," she screamed, marching toward the lead Humvee, her voice cracking like thin ice. A young sergeant stepped forward, permit in hand. "Training exercise, ma'am. Fully authorized by County, State Guard, and Marine Command." She tried to snatch the paper, her hands shaking. "I'll have your rank for this. Do you know who I am?" He lifted it higher, voice calm. "Ma'am, step back from the vehicle. You're obstructing federal movement." She spun to me, standing calm by my fence with a fresh mug, and I felt her hatred like a physical blow. "You did this. You brought the military into a residential neighborhood." I sipped, the coffee bitter on my tongue. "I filed paperwork. You filed fiction. Difference is, mine's legal. The Marines didn't storm houses. They patched potholes the HOA had ignored for 3 years, cleaned clogged ditches that flooded every spring, repainted faded crosswalks that had faded to ghosts. Kids biked alongside convoys waving tiny flags, their laughter a sound I hadn't heard in years. A news drone buzzed overhead. Hashtag Silver Meadows standoff trended before lunch, and I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my bones. Evelyn barricaded herself inside, blinds twitching like nervous eyelids. She posted on the HOA app, "Hostile occupation underway. Residents locked doors." I replied once. Technically, it's infrastructure improvement. The post hit 2 million views in an hour, and I allowed myself a small, tired smile. At 1100 the county inspector arrived, reflective vest, and clipboard now in official hands. He knocked on Evelyn's door. She answered in a silk robe, mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint gone wrong. "You can't inspect my property without a warrant." "County safety audit, ma'am. Your gate extends 6 inches into the public easement. That drainage blockage? That's a code violation. And this unpermitted pergola? Tear it down or face fines." She slammed the door, and I felt the first flicker of pity, quickly drowned by the memory of her threats. At 11:30 her sprinkler system chose freedom. A geyser of muddy sludge erupted from the flower beds, coating her blazer, her pearls, her perfectly coiffed hair. She slipped on the wet walkway, landed hard on her backside, clipboard flying into a puddle. The cameras caught every frame. Slow-motion replays set to dramatic strings went viral before the mud dried, and I felt a pang of something close to shame, quickly buried under the weight of justice. By 1400 the audit team rolled up with boxes and badges. Financial discrepancies, inflated landscaping fees, missing receipts for consulting services that never happened. Evelyn met them on the porch, voice cracking, her empire crumbling in real time. "This is a witch hunt. I've run this community with an iron fist for the good of property values." The lead auditor handed her a thick folder. "Cooperate, or we seize the records. Your choice." She tried to slam the door again. Morales caught it with one boot. "Ma'am, step aside. This is official business." I watched from the fence, my heart heavy with the finality of it all. The board met that night in the clubhouse. I watched from my tailgate across the street, thermos in hand, Daisy dozing at my feet, the weight of the day settling like dust. Harold, her former vice president, stood at the podium looking like a man released from a long captivity. All in favor of removing Evelyn Harper as president pending investigation. Every hand shot up. Applause echoed into the night like gunfire, and I felt the tension drain from my shoulders, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Harold found me later by the grill, hat in hand. "Colonel, we're donating the legal fund to the VFW. Figured you'd approve." I nodded, my voice rough. "Tell the boys the first round's on me." "And Harold? Next time you elect a president, pick one who knows the difference between a rule and a racket." Silver Meadows threw a barbecue the following Saturday. No agenda, no fines, just smoke and laughter and the smell of mesquite. Ruth, the new president, raised a glass by the grill. To the man who reminded us that community isn't a rule book. It's a handshake. I lifted my cup, my eyes stinging with something I refused to name. To neighbors who mind their own fences and let the rest of us ride in peace. Evelyn moved upstate 3 weeks later. Her house sold at auction to a young couple who painted the mailbox cobalt blue and never got a letter. The for sale sign lasted 3 days before it came down, and a swing set went up in the front yard, the sound of children's laughter drifting across the valley like a benediction. I still ride the ridge at sunset. Ginger's hooves kick up dust that smells like freedom. The windmill sings the same song it sang the day I drove the first post. The only difference is the quiet. Real quiet. The kind that settles in after the storm has passed, and everyone remembers whose land this always was, and whose heart it healed. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, when have you faced down a bully hiding behind rules? Did you fight with words, with law, or with something else entirely? Where do you draw the line between standing firm and crossing into vengeance? Was the colonel right to bring in the Marines, or did he escalate too far? Did Evelyn deserve every ounce of public humiliation, or did the punishment outstrip the crime? Speak your mind. The porch light is on, and the coffee's hot.